Welcome to The Factor, your trusted podcast for the life sciences industry powered by Chiminox. Today, we're discussing tech transfers in the biologics space, a difficult and complex process with a human element that is critical for success. Fortunately, we have an expert to guide us through navigating these challenges. Marcelo Anderson is the Vice President of Manufacturing, Technical Operations, and CMC at Veloxis Pharmaceuticals, and he's joined by host Ryan Doxey, Chiminox Senior Director of Technical Services. Throughout his 27-year career in Biopharma, Marcelo has extensive experience with tech transfers, which involve sharing knowledge and expertise between different teams, sites, and various stages of drug and product development. Whether you're preparing for an upcoming biologics tech transfer or looking to improve existing processes, this conversation provides a blueprint for breaking down silos and tapping into the motivation that can make or break your next project. Let's dive in with one of the industry's most seasoned experts on this critical topic.
Well, it sounds like the simplest thing in the world, right? I make a lasagna recipe at my own home, and I just need to go to somebody else's home and make the same lasagna recipe. But the altitude's different, and the ovens are different, and the containers are different. And so when you really get into the heart of a tech transfer, it's incredibly difficult and complex. And there's a lot of elements that can go wrong, as so many tech transfers do. Back about 10 years ago, the average cost of a tech transfer in our industry was $3 to $5 million. Now, a batch at large scale is $5 to $10 million, depending on it. So it's not an exorbitant cost, but it's the time.
Yes.
12 months, 18 months.
Yeah.
And so that time is a massive cost because you're typically doing in a clinical stage. Your patents are burning.
Yep.
The clinical trial time is burning. You cannot wait for those things.
Yeah.
And that is too important to miss. And so it's really important that companies make sure that they have very solid, well thought out technology transfers to say, not only do I document and know how do I do manufacturing at my current site and current scale, but the new site that I'm going to, the new scale, the new facilities, the new process, whatever transfers I'm making, I know that every element of that manufacturing, from the media prep and the raw material receipt to the storage of all samples and handling, to where I take samples and how I manufacture it, to how I do my analytical methods.
Right.
Every single one of these elements can go wrong, and they do go wrong.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And so it's really important to define your current system, understand the receiving site, what's their capability, and then do the transfer, create the documentation, and then this is the forgotten part, to be on the floor, be ready for the things that are going to happen because something's going to go wrong.
That's right.
Probably more than one thing.
That's right.
And so being prepared to deal with that. And then what also is really forgotten is capturing the lessons that are learned and then making sure that you take them right back to, before you begin the next tech transfer, revisit your lessons learned.
That's right. And so, going back to your time comment, you always hear the old adage, every day we're not on the market, it's $1 million, right? But nowadays, it's $10 million possibly, $50 million for every day we're not on the market. So that time is so critical. And then this environment of expect the unexpected, right? If you go in there, chest out, thinking, oh, we're just going to knock through this line by line by line and be done, no problems, you're in for a world of hurt, right? And so, how you lay that out and plan for it, because, in the development space, I feel like, that the scientists are a little bit more careful than, in a production operation where they're following a recipe, a line by line, and may not have the full understanding of what small changes have what the impact of those small changes are to your process and the outputs, right? And so, kind of leveraging off of that, taking that, it's not just a technology transfer, but that knowledge transfer from your process engineers and your scientists who, babied this process from its infancy, from the cells, and grow them into the product. How do you transfer that knowledge?
It is a great question, and it's a heck of a challenge. I've had a wonderful opportunity to mentor quite literally thousands of people in this industry. And I tell them something that is usually surprising to them. Start in manufacturing. I know process development or engineering or some of these other little more science-focused areas are interesting and attractive to people. Don't start there.
Yeah.
Start in manufacturing. Learn how the company actually has to make the product at the scale, the procedures you have to follow, the steps that are needed, because that is where the magic sauce is.
Right.
Now, when you know that, it's actually much easier to go to process development, develop that process, and now when you're transferring it, now you know not only the people in the facility and the procedures and the processes, but you know the nuances.
Yep.
And it's those nuances that really make all the difference in the world.
I agree wholeheartedly. And, so that's the true quality by design, right? Is, not to build it by quality, but maybe to take a step back and look at how it's made and then go backwards a little bit. So, a little different spin on the quality by design paradigm, right? But getting into this and linking up the manufacturing, but also the analytical, the stability, the incoming raw materials, how they're tested. Are they tested for ID and appearance only for your raw materials? Or do you actually have to get in there and understand where your raw materials are coming from, what they're going to do, and what impacts there are to the raw materials to your finished product?
So typically, if you're doing a tech transfer, that also means you're advancing in your clinical stage. Mm-hmm. So you may have done your phase 1 material production at site A, and now you're going to site B, scaling up. Mm-hmm. And you're expected to know a lot more about your process if you're going to phase 2, phase 3, or BLA. And that's really important to spend that time not only going through risk assessments and spending time to look at every CPP, every CQA, to understand really what are the connections and the ties and what's the priority of that risk. Right. So that's really important. But then it's also really important to go back and prioritize those things. Raw materials is the forgotten topic. Yep. And yet, if I look at the failures that I've seen, the issues are almost always a raw material or unanticipated thing. Right. And so, all right, you know about the raw materials. The problem is which raw material is going to get you. And so that's why really looking at your risk. We all know the excipients. Mm-hmm. Great, fine, we pay attention to those. But then the medias, that's obvious too. Yep. But then what really gets you is the trace metals, the trace elements in your salt. Yeah. You don't even think about that. And so if you're changing grades of material, you could be getting more pure, and that sounds like an obvious thing. You better test it. Right. Because more pure means less impurities, which means less trace metals. Mm-hmm. And so what if your cells were dependent upon those trace metals? And so it's really important to truly understand the grade of every single one of your raw materials and that risk evaluation on, is it possible that could impact my cells? You really need to demonstrate this, at least at pilot scale. And I suggest 3 different lots because now you get that variability. Yeah. Seasonally, that can really make a big difference too.
Yeah, that's a huge, huge thing to think about. And also the source of those materials, right? So in a small scale laboratory, even benchtop to a small pilot, you're probably not buying 25 to 50 kg drums of these salts and things like that. You're going to buy a 500 gram bottle, and the purity may not be as pure as you're intending it to be. And you think, oh, it's only going to get better, but as you mentioned, it actually may get worse. So that's very transformative in a way. And capturing all of that. So can we talk about some of the best ways to begin? For a company out there, kind of a virtual, really relying on external manufacturing. How do they get the point across to these the external manufacturing partners, even at a small phase 1, phase 2 scale? They know they're not going commercial with this place, but they still need the risk to be controlled, the risk to be identified, and how do we go about that?
Yes, so maybe we'll address going to these small contract sites. Yeah. 2 things, 3 things really. What's really important? First, check the lessons learned. Mm-hmm. Every site that has manufactured has lessons learned, and it's really important that even though you have lessons learned for that particular molecule at different sites, you need to know the site you're going to.
Yeah.
What are the lessons that they've had on similar programs?
Yep.
So I like to look at 18 months and say, of the last 18 months, which programs had some similarities, and look at the categories.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get too into the details about, well, did we fix that particular thing? I'm looking for the themes.
Right.
The big threads, because those tend to be consistent. Are their communication, are their documentation, is there training issues? Because those are the things that are fixable.
Yes.
And I really like to design around those. So first, starting with lessons learned, that wildly important.
Yeah.
Because now you're starting from a position of knowledge.
That's right.
Number two is not only defining the CPPs and the CQAs as we've done to the extent you can.
Right.
They might be presumptive if it's an early stage. And communicating those, we all know that. But then paying attention to pilot runs at the facility. How do they do it? What are the details of how do they add the nutrient? What's the filter loading size? How much flushing do they do of these filters? Harvest filters, for example, is a great one. How much flushing do you do? Void volumes of flushing. Those simple things can actually make quite a bit of difference, not only in carryover for HCP and DNA, but also in yield.
Yeah.
And those are really important. And you can't stop at the pilot. You've got to then be on the floor for the GMP manufacturing to see how do the two differ, if they differ at all.
Yep.
And oftentimes they do.
Yeah.
So I like to understand the context of my process development teams running the pilot run. Were they in manufacturing? Where they come from?
Right.
What do they know? And I'll ask a lot of questions about understanding their success in transfers and any issues that they've seen in scale up and transfers to the site. And then just getting to know the not just the leadership of the manufacturing group, but the actual people on the floor doing the work.
Yeah.
We're all human.
That's right.
When you get motivated about something, when you really care, you do better.
You do. I agree.
And so I love to spend time. I always ask to give a presentation on our asset. Let's talk about why this is important to patients.
Yeah.
Because it matters.
It does. I agree. I agree so much. So yeah, that's great. And so, building that culture and that partnership is so key to success. And so, you're ready to execute on the transfer. Things are going well, and you hit a hiccup. You hit a failure on an in-process control, a critical process control. So how do you handle these discrepancies, deviations? Bringing quality in at the right time. How do you handle that whole thing such that it does not basically cripple you to progress?
So a lot of people get stuck on I'm going to make a risk log of 500 items. I'm going to check off every single one, and then I know I've de-risked my project. That can work, but that's what leads to the $5 million, 12, 18-month tech transfers. Yeah. What we really want are the 3-month, $200,000 tech transfers that are just as successful, not compromising on success. And so what's particularly important is to make sure that we're paying attention to the details, yes, but building a capacity to handle the unknown. And so talking about who's going to make decisions for when the unknown happens, because it's not the 500 items that burn you. It's typically the unknowns and the surprises. That raw material that was less pure has some trace metals. Now the glycosylation profile is different.
Right.
Didn't even see it during the manufacturing, only saw later in analytical.
Yeah.
And so, but now you have a very clear communication escalation. So I'd like to have ideally somebody on the floor for the first batch at least, where the manufacturing people in the contract site know to call them, and they are empowered to make decisions. Some decisions you can take 12 hours, 24 hours. Great. Bring more people in.
Yep.
But there's a lot of these decisions that have to be made within a few hours, and it always happens at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
when people are not around. So defining and building that capability we found that to be particularly important in being able to make the right decision quickly, but also to answer the questions manufacturing has to prevent the issues. And that prevention, it's true what they say.
Yeah.
it's worth a pound of value.
That's right. That's right. And so, the proactive approach and having, the roles, responsibilities, the decision-making matrix identified, the value there is tremendous. And, just being proactive in your whole approach and, kind of setting the stage for how this needs to be executed, I think is really critical to the overall success. And so, tool-wise, everybody wants to know, what tools do I use? How do I do this? Do I just make an Excel spreadsheet and, stoplight it, green, yellow, red? What kind of tools can we use to be successful here?
While we like to make this an engineering exercise, I create a list of risks and I do a checklist of everything. This is really a human activity. Mm-hmm. This is our ability to transfer knowledge about the process, the equipment, the facilities, and the steps that are involved. And so the very first thing to do that I think is really critical is to agree upon a project scope. Mm-hmm. What's the scope? And define that and agree to that. I like to sign that within 24 hours of a kickoff. Yeah. And I like kickoffs to be face-to-face. Mm-hmm. So if we can at least all align on what the scope is and our objectives, we can change it later. Yeah. Of course. It is going to be a bit of a living document, but really defining that tool, that document, Word document. Mm-hmm. Mine historically are a dozen or more pages. Mm-hmm. They really start to get into some detail. Yeah. And I think that's really important because people forget. Yep. And so having a written document that everybody can refer back to, and there's competing and tech transfers happening, mm-hmm. so people can get confused. So that's really the first thing. The second thing is a project schedule. It makes sense. Everybody knows what activities are tied to what predecessors and what hold points do we have? What's the critical path? And so the classic project management activities of a project schedule. I really don't care about the tool. Yeah. Personally, I like project, but it doesn't really matter. Right. There's so many resources. It could be Excel. It could be written on a whiteboard. Yeah. What matters is that this is all stored in a central location that everybody has access to, and the tech transfer meetings are run from that project schedule. Because what we tend to do is build these gorgeous 1,000-line item project schedules, and nobody ever looks at it. Right. It has to be the center of all actions and activities. And the tech transfer leader really needs to be giving the preview. What's going to happen in 2 weeks is, let's make sure we're ready for this. Does anybody have any questions? Do they know the steps that they need to do? Yep. And so that to me is a wildly important tool. Oh, yeah. The human meeting. Yeah. The meeting minutes have a exponential decay in value. Mm-hmm. And so getting them out quick. Yep. So what we actually do is we'll create a OneNote and we will document live in the meeting. And so by the time the meeting is done, the meeting minutes are done. Mm-hmm. And so sure, somebody can go back and revise it and add more, but because it's available now and it's a single source of truth that everybody has access to, you've hit the maximum value. Yep. Versus waiting 2 weeks or, let me rephrase that, 2 days. Yeah. Right? People lose their value and they stop referencing it, and it's sent out in an email. Yep. Nobody can find it. Yep. Doesn't work. Yep. So I always like OneNote as a tool to keep a running log of action items, to keep a running log of meeting minutes, and so people can go back and refer to that. It also creates links for every single one of the critical shared documents that we're working on, SOPs, automation plans, project schedules, the various documents that we need. People need to know where that is and really focus on a single source of truth. We don't want to be sending emails. Here's my Rev 7 to that document. That's a recipe for disaster versus working on a it could be a Google Doc. Yeah. As long as we're all working on the same document, that's where the really important thing is. Yeah. The last element, and this is really should not be understated at all, is, as I said, this is human. And so what we tend to do is say, I'm done with my version, right, and I send it over the fence to you to go deal with. Yep. I cannot tell you the miscommunications that happen. I mean, but the frequency and the intensity of these miscommunications because, I thought that written sentence meant X, not Y. And so getting into a room, to review the critical documents
Yeah.
together to talk about the process.
Yeah.
Wildly important. This is a human endeavor we're doing.
That's right.
And so, yes, we're going to document it, and we're going to do engineering studies, and we're going to do all these science experiments. But we really have to make sure that we're paying attention to that human element, single source the truth, very clear responsibilities and accountabilities, very clear deliverable dates, and maintain a diligence in keeping them in front of us and talking about it. When we do those things, we focus on those balls and keep them in front of us. That's when we have success in tech transfer.
Yes. So that's the way you just laid that out is so great, and it's so simple, and it doesn't cost a lot, right? I mean, so planning and communication. What better two things to de-risk your entire program with a little bit of planning and communication, focusing on that human element, and the relationships that we can build, and you're not at it alone, right? You have a team. And if you don't understand something, or if you think you're misinterpreting, a sentence, ask. Talk to your peers, your colleagues, your superiors, the folks on the floor, and make sure everyone understands, what the intended output of this is. That's tremendous. And so, Marcelo, to round this out, this has been really informative and great. So, what do you think is the major pitfall that folks should look out for as they're preparing for a tech transfer, and what is the true measure of success?
So the major pitfall is siloization and communication. I know my role, I have my scope, and I have to focus on delivering that, and I'm not paying attention to your role and what you need to deliver. At the end of the day, nobody cares what my role is. They only cared, was the project done successfully? And so it's my responsibility to reach out and to partner with you and collaborate with you to understand your needs and my needs and make sure they're all synthesized, because this is still a very human thing. Yep. Let me give you a very real example. Folks in process development who run the pilot plant runs, they tend to be the technical experts initially. They need to go on the floor in manufacturing. The manufacturing associates love to talk to them, love to pick their brain. And so it's a win for everybody. And so that's a really important part. True, they can't do the manufacturing operations themselves because they don't have the GMP training, but it builds a camaraderie, a co-participation.
It does.
And that is wildly important.
Yeah.
And is a real key to success, and is a potential landmine if you're not paying attention to that, because that's where the simple mistakes are missed.
That's right. And it shows everyone that everyone is human, right? And it's not the man in the high castle directing down, to the folks on the floor. They're in the trenches together, ensuring success. So Marcelo, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure. I always love talking to you, and I look forward to the next one.
It was great fun for me, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That was Marcelo Anderson from Veloxis, along with Kymanox's Ryan Doxey. For more information, head on over to veloxis.com or kymanox.com, both of which are listed in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode. Please subscribe or follow this podcast in whatever app you're using right now, or follow Kymanox on LinkedIn for all updates. This episode was edited and produced by Earfluence. We'll see you again soon on The Factor.